Welcome to my channel. If you've enjoyed watching one or two of our videos and haven't subscribed yet, click that subscribe button now for more captivating stories like this. Don't miss a single story. Our tale commences in the morning on the royal estate of the Welton family. A young man woke up in his bed and let out a heavy sigh. He got up, realizing that he had once again had the same dream. This young man is named Jamie Welton, the eldest son of the Welton royal family and the rightful heir. He is also a powerful sorcerer known as Diablo Wolfir, who was recently defeated. That day, a seal appeared beneath his feet, and he proclaimed that even the 12 gods couldn't defeat him. They could only seal him away. He laughed at the irony and remarked that when he is reborn, their bright lights would be extinguished, and darkness would prevail. He vowed to torment them until their deaths, as they would beg for release. However, God responded that they would anticipate that moment, but first, he would endure eternal suffering. Thus, the 12 gods were able to seal him away. However, after a considerable amount of time, a gap appeared in their barrier, allowing him to escape. As a result, he was reborn as the son of the Welton family. Upon his rebirth, he was greeted by the enthusiastic voices of his parents. The man told his wife that their son had her eyes, marveling at their sparkle. She replied that their son looked just like him and encouraged him to admire his beautiful eyes. Little Jamie didn't understand what had happened and tried to speak, but only incomprehensible sounds came out. He wondered where he was and what was happening, unable to communicate properly. Consequently, he became an adored aristocrat, cherished by his parents. 9 years had passed since then, and as Jamie reminisced about his past, the nanny hurried towards him down the corridor. He looked out the window, taking a deep breath, expecting another mundane day. The nanny entered his room and greeted the young master. Jamie turned around and wished her a good morning. She approached him and inquired about his early activities. He replied that he was admiring the morning sky, remarking on its beauty. The nanny was delighted, praising the young master's wonderful nature. Jamie, however, looked away, contemplating the true meaning of wonderful. The nanny proceeded to dress him, acknowledging the beauty of the sky but reminding him that his parents were waiting for him. Jamie happily consented, and the nanny led him to the dining room, where his family was already seated. His mother greeted him with a good morning, and the rest of the family followed suit. Jamie waved at them and joined them for breakfast, sitting next to his little sister. His mother commented on how adorable their children were, noting their resemblance to her. Jamie couldn't help but think that she wasn't his real mother but rather the daughter of the noble Bell family, Sears Bell Welton. His father, the head of the royal family, Argano Welton, was one of the 5 sword masters in their kingdom. Argano expressed that their children were angels who took after their mother, emphasizing their sparkling eyes. Jamie observed the little girl next to him and considered her to be his little sister. Sarah placed a piece of food on her fork and instructed her brother to open his mouth wider. Jamie listened to her and expressed gratitude for the delicious food she was feeding him. In return, Jamie also took some food on his fork and began to feed Sarah, knowing it was something she enjoyed. Their parents watched them happily, but Jamie turned away to conceal his displeased expression. He found the situation boring and longed for some solitude. After breakfast, Jamie retreated to his room and buried his face in his pillow, reflecting on how adorable they could be. Embracing the pillow, he contemplated the numerous activities he could engage in within the mansion, including the private library. In his younger years, Jamie had once wished for death due to his inability to speak normally, feeling as if his tongue was too short. However, he now cherished the mansion and all its possibilities. Suddenly, a flying eye flew up to Jamie and perched on his head, providing him with a sense of alertness and preventing him from feeling tired. Jamie saw this as a newfound ability, a result of his rebirth. He crushed the flying eye in his hand, pondering the persistence of the 12 deities who still clung to their beliefs and aspirations like parasites. Examining the black blood staining his hand, Jamie acknowledged that, for the time being, this might be the extent of his capabilities. However, he took solace in the fact that information on dark magic was scarce in this era, giving him an advantage with time on his side. Jamie hoped the gods would continue to favor him as they had in the past so he could grow stronger. Just then, the nanny unexpectedly entered the room and informed Jamie that it was time to read children's books with Madam. Jamie remained silent, and the nanny called out to him. Jamie swiftly turned around with a smile and assured the nanny that he would join them shortly. At that moment, thoughts of curses flashed through Jamie's mind, dreading the need to play the role of the cute boy again. He yearned to be sealed away once more. Jamie followed the nanny until they reached his mother and sister. Sears urged Jamie to come quickly, and he obediently approached them, sitting on the floor in front of his mother. With a smile, he asked her which book she would read to them that day. Sears and Sarah were initially surprised by his behavior, but they both embraced him tightly. His mother affectionately referred to him as her sweet little baby, remarking on how cute he was and how he was her darling. Jamie endured this display of affection, and his mother announced that they would be reading a book called The Great Magician Heinz. She asked if they liked the name. The children settled down next to their mother, and she began reading a fairy tale. After a while, she closed the book and declared that Heinz lived happily ever after. She asked if they enjoyed the book. Jamie smiled and expressed his desire to become a cool magician like Heinz. His mother replied, complimenting his intelligence and expressing her confidence in his success. She mentioned that he had already surpassed his 3 magic teachers. Jamie wondered if she was mocking him, perhaps because he had outperformed the teachers she had hired for him. Sears gently patted his head and shared that his father had invited the most powerful magician specifically for Jamie. Jamie studied his mother's face and concluded that she wasn't joking. Finally, he smiled and exclaimed how amazing it was to have a wonderful dad. He stood up from the sofa, and his mother inquired if he was going to the library. She advised him not to spend his time reading there but rather to enjoy the fresh air. She extended her arms and invited him to come and embrace her. Jamie let out a heavy sigh, wishing he could just leave. Despite his reluctance, he still hugged his mother, and she commented on how sweet he was. She suggested that he go play with her instead of going to the library. As she squeezed him tightly, Jamie's thoughts screamed for her to stop. He realized that time had passed and decided to sit on a chair near the windows to read a book. Closing the book, he felt disappointed that there was nothing interesting about the use of mana in it. He wondered if there was even a single useful book in the library. Feeling like it was already lunchtime, Jamie grew tired of eating with his family 3 times a day. He resolved to come back before the nanny fetched him. Leaving the library, he encountered an old man in the corridor. The old man looked at a statue and commented on the Welton family's use of a rare artifact as decoration. Jamie wondered who the old man was. Finally noticing Jamie, the old man greeted him. Jamie observed the old man and thought that he possessed a significant amount of mana, flowing from him like an unceasing storm. He grew cautious and questioned how the old man had arrived there. He clenched his fist and considered if the old man was a robber, but his calm demeanor didn't match that of an invader in a swordmaster's mansion. The old man noticed Jamie's reaction and Jamie asked who he was and how he had gotten there, noting that the place was not a walk-through yard. The old man sensed the aura emanating from Jamie and compared him to a tiger cub that would grow into a tiger, just like his father. The old man didn't answer, frustrating Jamie, who believed the old man should have knelt before him. Irritated by the old man's calm behavior and the way he appraised him, Jamie decided to use magic to show the old man what would happen if his guard was down. The old man noticed and realized that the rumors about Jamie's strength were not true. He became more curious about what Jamie would do and decided to use magic as well, contemplating Jamie's true strength. Jamie noticed the old man's actions and became enraged. He, Diablo Wolfir, who in his past life almost destroyed all the gods, sent a flash of magic at the old man. However, the old man remained unaffected, standing in place while a little dust rose at the entrance to the dining room. Jamie realized that his attack had done nothing. The old man smiled widely, amazed that Jamie was only 9 years old. He exclaimed that it was a good try and now it was his turn. He directed his magic towards Jamie, who realized that the spell wasn't aimed at him, relieving him from the need to dodge. The old man was taken aback and thought to himself that the boy didn't even flinch. At that moment, Argano, the boy's father, stepped in and protected his son from the magic. He approached his son and asked if he was all right. Jamie confirmed that he was fine and pretended to wipe away tears, assuring his father that he was okay. Argano was surprised, thinking that his child had been crying. He turned angrily towards an old man named Marquis Lyol and expressed his desire to have a conversation with him. Jamie looked at Marquis with a mischievous smile, noticing the difference in his behavior, and thought to himself that acting more modestly in front of his father. Jamie let out a laugh and remarked that it was quite amusing, even envying Marquis. Argano was surprised by the situation and thought that Marquis had suddenly attacked his child. Concerned, they both retreated to Argano's office and began to have tea. Argano placed his cup on the table and stated that Jamie was his son and the heir of the Welton family. Marquis took a sip of tea and replied that he was aware of that. Argano, displeased, questioned what Marquis meant by his statement. Marquis advised him to calm down, as his aura made him feel uneasy, as one would expect from a swordmaster. The Marquis inquired about how much Argano knew about his son. Argano asked what he should know, and Marquis replied that he should be aware of his son's brilliance. Argano became angry, stating that this was the reason he trusted Marquis, who believed that Argano was genuinely furious. Marquis mentioned that Argano seemed to have no knowledge about his son, and he decided to pretend he hadn't heard Argano's words and declined to accept Jamie as his student. Argano asked for clarification, noting that Marquis was considered the most powerful 8th grade magician, so it was unlikely that he would fail to recognize his son, Jamie. Argano think to himself, is Jamie not that talented as he thought? Marquis noticed Argano's doubts and clarified that it was not what Argano thought. Argano asked Marquis to be more precise, and Marquis explained that he couldn't take his son as an apprentice because he wouldn't be able to handle him. Argano was surprised and asked who could handle a son that an 8th grade magician couldn't. Marquis smiled and revealed that his son could anticipate his actions. Argano found it impossible to believe, but Marquis added that Jamie had also noticed his spell passing by without flinching. Moreover, Jamie had already achieved the level of a 3rd-class magician through self-training alone, and if they disregarded the limitations of his body, his level might even surpass the 4th grade. Argano, with a pleased expression, considered Marquis's words. Marquis described Jamie as a genius, or rather, a monster, a true monster who didn't need a teacher but only their support to continue improving. Marquis speculated that they might have given birth to a legendary 9th grade magician. Argano remained silent, his hand clenched into a fist in surprise, contemplating the possibility of his son becoming a legendary 9th grade magician. Marquis stood up from the couch, apologized for attacking Jamie, and expressed excitement about the immense discoveries awaiting in magic, or rather, the whole world. With a laugh, he vanished from the office, accompanied by bright sparks. Argano continued to ponder the recent events, leaning his head back and sighing heavily. Night fell, and Jamie returned to his room, expressing his exhaustion. His mother became aware of what the old man had done, and she began to show her concern once again. She embraced Jamie tightly and asked if he was all right, assuring him that she would handle the situation with the old man. Jamie felt that he had wasted a lot of time and removed his jewelry. He remarked that he could see the true essence of the spell. He acknowledged that it was not bad in terms of composition, technique, balance, and type. However, what impressed him more was not Marquis but his father, Count Argano Welton. Jamie smiled and chuckled, acknowledging that he knew his father was strong, but he didn't realize just how powerful he was. He believed that his father deserved that strength. Suddenly, Marquis's voice came from behind Jamie, asking what was so amusing. Jamie turned around and saw the old man sitting on his bed, his face contorted with a dreadful grimace. Marquis questioned whether Jamie was so lost in his thoughts that he hadn't even noticed him. Startled, Jamie screamed in fear and fell to the floor, exclaiming his surprise at Marquis's presence. Marquis laughed and asked if that meant Jamie was easily scared. Jamie inquired how Marquis had managed to enter his room. Marquis got up from the bed and revealed that he had teleported there. Jamie speculated that his father must have spared Marquis's life, as he knew the old man was unusual. But Marquis's ability to teleport without any difficulty surprised him. Marquis grinned and commented on Jamie's behavior, noting that he was so humble when his father was around but acted differently with Marquis. Jamie stood up from the floor and retorted, asking if Marquis thought that family and strangers were the same. The old man laughed and called Jamie a funny fellow, expressing his regret that he wasn't a bit stronger. Jamie then questioned Marquis about his identity and why he was looking at him in such a manner, considering that they had only recently met. In response, Marquis handed Jamie a book and said it was for him. Jamie wondered if it was a magical memoir. As the book landed in Jamie's hands, he asked Marquis why he had given it to him. Marquis explained that the magic he used had become outdated long ago, so he decided to pass the book on to Jamie. Indignant, Jamie thought about Marquis's comment and felt humiliated, wondering if his magic was already considered outdated. He averted his gaze, pursed his lips, and pondered the situation. Marquis asked if Jamie was deeply moved by the gift, and he revealed that the book contained many of his original spells, making Jamie the first to read it. Jamie's thoughts shifted, realizing that the book contained spells created by this great magician. He marveled at how different the magic of this time was compared to his own. Jamie referred to his magic as ancient, but he resolved to show Marquis more. Suddenly, Marquis spoke again, and Jamie looked up from the book. Marquis began to vanish and expressed his high hopes for Jamie, wondering what Jamie would become the next time they met. With Marquis's disappearance, Jamie replied confidently that he would become much stronger than Marquis anticipated. Now, Jamie intended to study the contents of the book, which contained all the magic existing in the world. He understood that the most effective way to learn how to control mana was to pass it through oneself and absorb it with the heart. However, Jamie acknowledged a significant challenge, the limitation of mana that passed through. Marquis commented on his own spells being too old, leaving Jamie curious about what kind of spells Marquis had used. Jamie flipped through the book, finding it amusing but still challenging. He realized that he needed to sense every particle of mana so that it could flow through his entire body and skin. Exhausted, he wearily lay down on the bed and contemplated the immense effort required to surpass those who were skilled in these old methods. He had already identified 2 disadvantages, but he smiled at the thought that he, Diablo Wolfir, would rise above them. With determination, he rose from the bed and eagerly opened the book, acknowledging that the old man had opened his eyes to a new world. He pledged to read every page of this precious book, but he knew he needed assistance. Snapping his fingers, a flying eye appeared above his hand and perched on his shoulder. Jamie asked if it could spray some mana there, and the familiar responded with a sound. Concentrating, he opened his eye wider, realizing that the first disadvantage of this technique was the limited absorption of mana particles by his body. He understood the need to observe the proportions strictly. However, with his loyal companion, Blackie, who had a soul contract with him, the issue of proportions could be resolved. Blackie could burn the required amount of mana, eliminating any problems. Once the first disadvantage was solved, Jamie believed the second one would be less problematic. The second drawback was his body's limit on the amount of mana his heart could accept. However, he devised a plan to distribute the mana to different parts of his body, removing any restrictions. The next morning, the nanny called the Count to Jamie's room, expressing her concern. The Count entered Jamie's room and observed the swirling mana around him, marveling at his son's hidden talents. He instructed the nanny to leave Jamie undisturbed for the day and stationed someone at his door. Satisfied, he contemplated how his son would become a magician rather than a swordsman, possibly influenced by his wife's family. The Count smiled, acknowledging that his son's magical abilities exceeded his expectations. Time passed, and Jamie finished his practice, opening his eyes with joyous shouts of success. Initially, manipulating mana proved challenging due to its unpredictable movements, but after several attempts, he triumphed. However, he realized that his current limit was only at the 4th level, which disappointed him as he had hoped to achieve more. The little black familiar sat on his head and squeaked, capturing Jamie's attention. He inquired about the familiar's message, realizing that he had no desire to enhance his body further at this moment, acknowledging his youth and relative weakness. The familiar moved to his shoulder and squeaked again, to which Jamie smiled and agreed. He would be patient and bide his time, knowing that these obstacles were not insurmountable. With determination, he commanded Blackie to utilize the invisibility spell, and as if by magic, he vanished into thin air. Jamie expressed his desire to meet his father, realizing that he needed to ensure his mana remained hidden. He believed that everything would not be okay if his father were to suddenly discover his magical abilities. Blackie concealed his mana, and Jamie noted that he could barely sense its presence, as expected from his familiar. Confident that his father would not notice anything amiss, Jamie left his room, accompanied by a black aura. Meanwhile, the Count was engaged in a meeting, wondering why the priest had come and interrupted his busy schedule. The priest explained that he simply wanted to greet the Count and express gratitude for giving the Zenith cult an opportunity in the Has lands, where there had never been any issues concerning religion. The Count agreed, stating that he believed it would be beneficial to support the community and make the Zenith cult the greatest in his lands, given the increasing support it garnered. The priest understood that the Count wanted to assert his authority and cautioned against treating the people as mere followers of the gods, urging the Count to take him more seriously. The Count suggested ending the conversation, acknowledging his busy schedule. The priest thanked him for his concern and bid him farewell, expressing blessings from the great Zenith. As soon as the door closed, the Count's smile vanished from his face. Meanwhile, Jamie hid behind a column, observing the priest. He recognized the crescent moon symbol with a yellow sphere and the dark aura emanating from the priest. He wondered how and why the priest was present in his father's domain and why his father had chosen the Zenith cult among all religions. Determined to prevent the spread of this faith in his lands, Jamie resorted to his only option, given the circumstances that limited his freedom of action. Since the religion had official sanction from his father, the only way to eliminate it was to compel his father to drive them away. Jamie decided to meet his father and initiate his investigation. He approached his father's door and announced himself as Jamie. They both moved to the living room, where Jamie updated his father on his progress. His father expressed satisfaction, asking if Jamie had overcome all challenges. Jamie confirmed his success, and his father remarked that he must truly enjoy magic. Jamie questioned if something was wrong, and his father admitted that he had always envisioned Jamie growing up as an ordinary child. He expressed concern about the complexities of living as a prodigy, where initial applause often turned into bullying when the novelty wore off. He questioned whether it was truly beneficial for Jamie to become a genius. Gripping the armrest, he informed Jamie that if he didn't enjoy practicing magic, he could quit and pursue other endeavors. However, if Jamie had made a firm decision, his father would not oppose him but would provide the best support possible. Jamie smiled reassuringly and assured his father that he would never give up magic. Argano smiled back and expressed his approval. However, as he looked at his son, he couldn't help but wonder how a 9-year-old boy could possess such a vast amount of mana. He could sense mana emanating from Jamie's entire body, which both amazed and scared him. Argano worriedly questioned if mana could be stored somewhere other than the heart. He then asked if Jamie had learned everything from the memoirs given to him by Marquis Lyol the previous day. Jamie confirmed his father's suspicions and added that he had even improved upon some of the techniques described in the book. A bead of cold sweat rolled down Argano's face as he contemplated what Marquis had done. He couldn't fathom how much Jamie could learn in just one day, and he began questioning if his son was truly destined to become a legendary 9th-grade magician. Chuckling, Argano mused that compared to Jamie, he himself was insignificant. Jamie noticed the change in his father's demeanor and asked if something was wrong. Argano smiled and assured him that he was proud of him, laughing because he felt an extra sense of pride that day. Jamie joined in the laughter, but it felt forced to him, and he wondered when his father would stop patting his head. Suddenly, Argano pointed at Blackie, Jamie's familiar, and asked if Jamie had summoned it himself. Jamie became frightened and asked if that's how his father saw Blackie. In a panic, Blackie started flying above Jamie's head, and Jamie couldn't believe what was happening. He distinctly remembered casting an invisibility spell on Blackie, yet his father could still see him. Argano, with a smile, asked if Blackie was a bat, noting its cuteness. He gestured with his arms, indicating the size. He perceived Blackie to be. Jamie marveled at his father's strength, wondering if he had realized that Jamie had used dark magic to shape Blackie. Jamie explained that he had intentionally given Blackie the form of a bat to hide him, as he thought his father would be surprised to learn that Jamie had done it himself. Argano immediately embraced Jamie and expressed his pride, emphasizing that his surprise would stem not from fear, but from Jamie's talent. He was incredibly proud to be Jamie's father. After a while, Jamie left the room, feeling exhausted and contemplating why they loved him so much. Night had fallen, and Jamie donned his cloak, calling for Blackie. The familiar promptly appeared, flapping its large black wings. Jamie conveyed the need to uncover the reason behind their presence in his territory, and they decided it was time to take action. With that, Blackie picked up Jamie, and together they soared into the night sky above the city. Meanwhile, in a dark alley, two men from a criminal organization met. One asked about the boss's instructions, and the other replied that they were to follow the plan precisely if they wanted to avoid death. He let out a sigh, and his friend expressed his contemplation about what the future held for them. A member of the rebel criminal organization named Philip admitted that he didn't fully comprehend the extent of what they had gotten involved in. Jans asked if Philip didn't understand that he would make any sacrifice to achieve his own goals. He mentioned that Hay is a land where even Earl Welton himself would allow their organization to coexist peacefully with everyone, as long as they didn't cross a certain line. However, human trafficking completely crossed that line and eliminated any notion of peaceful coexistence. Philip responded by saying that if they were lucky, they could escape without getting caught, and no one would apprehend them. Jans countered that he was the only one who believed that, as sooner or later, they would inevitably be caught. He questioned whether Philip knew how much the Count loved his children, and what would happen if he discovered they were using other children for their illicit trade on his own land. Jans asserted that if that day came, all criminal organizations would be eradicated from the city forever. Philip mentioned that the boss seemed confident they wouldn't be caught. Jans clenched his teeth and sarcastically asked if he thought the sword master wouldn't be able to capture them, considering it a joke. Philip claimed that Han, their contact, assured them that his people would assist them. Jans retorted that Han was willing to do anything, to which Philip sighed and inquired about their next course of action, whether they should escape or turn themselves in. Jans expressed a preference for running away, citing one of the rules of the underworld that forbade betrayal and disclosure of plans to third parties. Philip agreed, and they agreed to attempt an escape. Jans asked if Philip had any plans, acknowledging the vastness of the lands they were in, and how thoroughly they would be pursued. Philip admitted he didn't know, and they decided to play it by ear. Meanwhile, Jamie stealthily approached them, and Jans questioned who came up with the idea of engaging in the slave trade in that location. Jamie peered around the corner, and Philip speculated that the boss likely received an offer and impulsively seized the opportunity, but he didn't understand the motives behind it. Suddenly, both Jans and Philip noticed Jamie's presence and demanded to know who he was. Jamie smiled mischievously and replied with a hint of intrigue, leaving Jans clenched his fist and suggested letting Jamie die if he didn't want to talk. Jans and Philip lunged at Jamie, but to their surprise, he vanished. They frantically searched for him, wondering where he had gone. Jans concluded that there was no one there, but then Jamie's voice echoed, causing them to freeze and listen. Jamie approached them, and expressed his curiosity, stating that he wanted to hear all the details. He used his magic, which frightened the two men. Subsequently, they sat down in front of Jamie and recounted everything. Both Jans and Philip fell silent, and Jamie pondered the fact that they were involved in human trafficking, including children. These were the kind of people his father despised the most. He couldn't understand what these foolish individuals were thinking and if they wanted to be killed. Jamie found their actions infuriating and bit his lip, reflecting on how not only did these thick-headed individuals manipulate others at their whim, but now people dared to manipulate others, no different from the gods they despised. He wondered what the boss was thinking when assigning them this job, considering he should know his father's character well. Jamie had a foreboding feeling about the situation. He leapt off the boxes and then used his magical powers on the men, commanding them to go to the Count's estate and divulge everything they knew. The men immediately obeyed and rose to their feet. Jamie remarked that it was going to be a stormy morning as the robbers slowly made their way towards the estate. He instructed Blackie that they needed to return, but before they could take off, the two men were swiftly thrown back with incredible speed. Philip crashed into the wall, leaving a large hole in his stomach, while his friend was severely burned. Philip's lifeless body fell onto the road with a distinct thud, and Jamie turned around to assess the aftermath. Suddenly, laughter emanated from behind him as a man ridiculed them for being foolish idiots. One of his friends cautioned him for being too loud, suggesting that the guards were likely already on their trail. Jamie wondered where this madman had come from and, using his magic, questioned if he dared to harm those who followed his commands. A magic circle materialized behind him, and he used his powers on the corpses of the robbers, forbidding them from dying until they fulfilled his instructions. Their wounds began to heal, catching the attention of Hanai, who had injured them. Han noticed Jamie and instructed his subordinates to take a good look at who they had there, ordering them to capture Jamie along with the two idiots. Jamie continued his spellcasting while Hanai warned his subordinates not to let them escape. Two men were dispatched to drag away the bodies of Philip and Jans, whom Jamie had almost healed. Hanai declared that they would kill the two later. A tear rolled down Philip's cheek as he pleaded for Jamie's help. Jamie watched as they were hauled away, calling Han scum. Hanai laughed and taunted Jamie, telling him to die, and proceeded to attack Jamie with magical projectiles, piercing his body and urging him to die. Hanai reveled in the act, finding it exhilarating and relishing Jamie's screams before finally burning his body with magic. Gazed at the charred remains with horror and asked Hanai why he had harmed them. Hanai turned to him and questioned what Jans meant, asserting that he was certain Jamie had attacked them. Suddenly, Jamie's voice resonated near Hanai's ear, asking if that was all he could do. Hanai quickly withdrew, and Jamie inquired if he was having fun. Hanai, filled with fear, asked what Jamie meant. Jamie repeated the question, asking if Hanai enjoyed killing his partner. Hanai wondered who Jamie was and why he was still alive. He also noticed an ominous aura emanating from Jamie's body. Jamie stated that Hanai underestimated him, considering himself only a third-class wizard. Hanai threatened to kill Jamie, casting a powerful fire spell, believing it would reduce Jamie's small body to ashes and leave no trace behind. Hanai attacked, commanding Jamie to die, but a bright flash illuminated told Hanai that he should let him explain how the human mind works. Hanai stood frozen in shock, and Jamie remarked that people feel utterly helpless when faced with individuals who are much stronger than them, which is why he relishes manipulating those who are weaker. Hanai collapsed to his knees, his face hitting the ground, and he lay motionless. His partner, filled with fear, exclaimed that Jamie had effortlessly defeated Hanai, describing him as a monstrous being. They needed to escape. Jamie waved his hand and suggested that they should consider themselves unlucky. Dark streams of magic enveloped their bodies as Jamie clenched his fist, utilizing destructive magic. The magic compressed the bodies of the bandits, causing them to scream in agony. Jamie approached Hanai and declared that his time had come. He seized Hanai by the hair, lifting his head, and demanded that his slave answer all his questions. Hanai referred to Jamie as his master and obediently began speaking about young children. Jamie dismissed it, stating that he had heard it all before, deeming it a waste of time. Jamie believed that his father would eventually find out the information through other means, thanks to those two idiots. He released Hanai and contemplated what to do with him. Despite having halted Hanai's death, Jamie believed that his soul was already nearly destroyed. Though his body appeared unharmed, as a third-class magician, he wouldn't last long. Jamie considered turning him into an undead creature, but due to the rapid decay of his soul, it would be a temporary solution. He smiled, realizing that he had no choice but to employ another method. Knowing that he possessed sufficient mana as a third-class magician, he pointed his hand at Hanai's head, expressing his appetite. After absorbing the mana, Hanai's body began to boil. Jamie remarked that it wasn't bad and wiped his lips with a handkerchief. Due to Jamie's human characteristics, the mana contained many impurities, but he considered himself fortunate to have consumed such a large amount. He shifted his attention to Philip and Jans, deliberating on what to do with them. Approaching them, he mentioned that he had shared some of his mana with them but doubted they could endure in their current state. Sparks of dark magic emitted from Jamie's body, and Blackie materialized from it, emitting a questioning squeak. Jamie informed the two surviving bandits that they still had unfinished business, preventing him from allowing their deaths. He employed magic and acknowledged that it had been a while since he had last used necromancy. Necromancy involved reviving dead bodies, similar to resurrection, but with a distinction that the resurrected bodies were no longer considered living beings. They became undead creatures, existing in a state that defied the laws of nature, both alive and dead simultaneously. Jamie declared them his faithful servants, granting them a second chance at life despite their demise. He requested Blackie's assistance, and together they ascended into the sky, awaiting Jamie's command. Jamie announced that they were commencing and used magic on Philip and Jans, instructing them to relinquish their skills and embrace rebellion. Philip's veins bulged, and Jamie mused that he was still experiencing the afterlife. Jamie informed them that immortality awaited, urging them to reject death. Tears welled up in the bandits' eyes as they rolled back, and Jamie continued to revive them, calling out to them. Both bandits screamed, and with Blackie's assistance, Jamie completed the process. Jamie ceased his actions, and Philip and Jans knelt before him, awaiting his orders. Jamie looked at them incredulously, wondering if it was over. However, he noticed lingering black smoke and questioned whether he had made a mistake. The little black creature landed on his head and emitted apologetic squeaks. Jamie expressed his displeasure, questioning what the creature had told him and what was wrong with him. He reassured Blackie, acknowledging that he himself might be the one in the wrong, though it was difficult for him to admit. Blackie squealed. Frustrated, he stretched Blackie to the side, but Jamie stated that he couldn't keep them anyway and decided to get rid of them. And acknowledged that the release of black smoke would hinder their ability to carry out Zenith's orders or move about unnoticed. Suddenly, the little black creature swung to the sides and bit Jamie on the cheek, much to his displeasure. It quickly flew away and settled on Daeon's head, collecting the dark haze. Jamie questioned its capability, and after chewing the dark haze, the haze disappeared completely. Jamie declared that he could now use them. Turning to Blackie, who had grown significantly in size, Jamie praised its efforts. He then turned to the bandits and suggested that they needed new names now that they were rebelling. He named Jans, Azard, and his friend, Ryza. Jamie commanded them to rebel repeatedly until they regained consciousness. As Jamie waved his hand, they looked ahead in confusion. Jamie observed their puzzled expressions and decided to give them some time to recover. They remained silent until Azard asked if Jamie was the one who brought them back to life. Jamie confirmed it, causing Azard to feel scared and question who Jamie really was. Noting Jamie's youthful appearance and ominous aura, Azard likened him to a character from a childhood book, a sinister creature challenging the world. Jamie grinned and asked what was wrong, suggesting that he resembled a demon lord in their eyes. Nervously, Ryza swallowed his saliva and boldly stated that while he couldn't determine if Jamie was a demon lord or something else, he appeared human to him. Jamie was surprised by the response, finding it interesting. He realized that his behavior had been excessively aggressive, as if he hadn't recognized that his master was now standing before him. He suspected flaws in his spell and extended his index finger forward, determined not to turn a blind eye to the situation. Then, he pointed his finger downward, causing Ryza to fall to the ground, hitting his head. Jamie approached him and delivered a message, stating that he would forgive him this time, but any further disrespect would not go unpunished. Ryza fearfully acknowledged his understanding. Jamie turned his attention to Azard and remarked that this applied to him as well. Azard agreed, and Jamie reflected on the essence of soul subjugation, where lives are bound by contracts regardless of personal desires. He recalled something and clarified that he was not a demon lord. Curiosity piqued, Azard inquired about Jamie's identity. Jamie removed his hood and replied with a smile, stating that he was an ordinary dark magician, a magician who once attempted to kill the gods and now existed solely for that purpose. He assigned them a task: to monitor the Zenith church and gather information regarding it. They pledged their loyalty, and Jamie added another instruction: to bring him anyone who might possess knowledge about human trafficking, as he wanted that person to inform his father of everything. After giving the orders, Jamie disappeared without further commands. Ryza looked up and sighed with relief, realizing he was gone. Azard also sighed, and they exchanged glances. Azard hesitantly suggested that they should start working, and Ryza agreed, acknowledging that they couldn't disobey Jamie's orders. Meanwhile, Blackie expressed complaints to Jamie, who reassured the creature that everything would be fine and that their fear would prevent them from easily defying his commands. Blackie perched on Jamie's shoulder as he stated that with their help, his father would be able to address the issue of the slave trade. Once again, the little black creature bit Jamie on the cheek and squealed. Jamie responded, expressing his determination to put an end to human trafficking in the region, as it would ultimately fall under his control. Suddenly, footsteps approached, and Jamie told Blackie that they needed to conclude for the day. Unexpectedly, a boy collided with Jamie's back and fell to the ground. Irritated, Jamie turned around and questioned if the boy was blind. However, he quickly realized the boy's young age and paused. He was also a child. The boy confirmed and, as the little black creature clung to Jamie's hair, Jamie acknowledged that he was indeed only 9 years old. He forgave the boy this time but advised him to be more cautious in the future. Jamie distanced himself from the boy, who quietly muttered a comment about Jamie thinking he was an adult despite lacking any gray hair. Suddenly, Blackie tugged on Jamie's hair, prompting him to turn around and question the cause of the disturbance. Observing the boy's frown, Jamie wondered if Blackie's actions were in response to his joke about hair color. Indignantly, he scolded the boy, threatening consequences if he did not watch his language unless he wished to face dire consequences. The boy rushed forward in a state of fright and exclaimed his profuse apologies. Jamie let out a tired sigh and asked the little black creature if it was satisfied now. The little creature emitted a contented squeal, and Jamie urged them to quickly return home. They made their way back home, and Blackie glanced away guiltily. Jamie settled onto the bed and inquired if the boy even comprehended the gravity of his actions. The little black creature squeaked once more, and Jamie warned that if such behavior were to occur again, there would be more severe consequences. The creature squeaked again, prompting Jamie to ponder where it could have learned such behavior. He lay back on the bed, expressing exhaustion, realizing that he had expended more energy than anticipated. He had a great deal of work ahead of him, marking the end of his easy and carefree life. Furthermore, he anticipated the arrival of one of the gods he despised the most, Zenith, into his life and territory. The mere thought of Zenith caused him to clench his fist and place his hand on his forehead, asserting that he didn't care and challenging Zenith to try his best. He resolved to destroy all of Zenith's followers, regardless of their numbers. Meanwhile, his new subordinates diligently carried out their assigned tasks. Azard returned to the shelter and inquired about the whereabouts of the elder brother. Azard ignored the question and reiterated his inquiry. The person responded that Hanai had threatened to personally kill both of them, wondering why they were still alive. Azard's frustration compelled him to strike the wall and address the person as Pip, warning him not to repeat his question. Pip wondered about the source of Azard's newfound power and, more importantly, where the others had gone. He raised his hands, indicating his lack of knowledge regarding the elder brother's whereabouts. Ryza approached Pip and asked if he was certain, causing Pip to nervously stammer and affirm his certainty, fearing for his life. Ryza regarded him skeptically, feeling exhausted by the situation. He recognized the need to locate the boss in order to carry out their master's orders. Since the boss possessed knowledge about the city and potentially had information regarding the Zenith Church, there was a high probability of finding leads there. Ryza turned to Pip and inquired where he believed the boss might be. Pip, overcome by fear, realized he needed to provide a plausible answer to avoid dire consequences. He suggested checking nearby bars, as the boss had a fondness for women and alcohol. Azard agreed with Ryza's assessment, and then unexpectedly struck Pip in the face, reminding him that their master had instructed them to find any witnesses. They deliberated on the best hiding place, considering tying him up in the forest or locking him in the basement of his house. Ryza delivered a kick to Pip and proposed the latter option, stating that they had wasted enough time. Azard hoisted Pip over his shoulder, and they departed. As time passed, the boy opened a door and was met with a gruesome sight, a room filled with lifeless bodies. He entered the room and inquired about the situation, wondering if everyone was dead. He anticipated being punished again for failing to meet his quota from the previous day. However, it seemed there was no one present who could administer the beating. Realizing he needed to leave before anyone grew suspicious, he hurried towards the exit. The next morning, Jamie woke up, let out a yawn, and acknowledged his fatigue. It was no surprise considering how long he had slept. He realized he couldn't avoid encountering them any longer and proceeded to the dining room. He informed Blackie that he would have to keep him away to avoid attracting his father's attention. Blackie vanished, and Jamie entered the dining room. He greeted his parents and inquired about their sleep. His father wished him a good morning, and Sarah, his sister, mentioned that she had slept well the previous night. Jamie didn't notice his mother at the table and asked about her whereabouts. Suddenly, his mother playfully pounced on him from her hiding place, revealing that she was right there. Startled, Jamie let out a brief scream and asked where she had been hiding, admitting that he hadn't noticed her. She jokingly asked if he was serious, and Jamie averted his gaze, knowing all along that she had been standing behind the door. His mother affectionately patted his head and asked if her little Jamie had been scared. Jamie confirmed her words and reassured her that everything was fine now that he knew it was her. His mother smiled and commented on his good manners. Sensing what his mother was about to do, Jamie quickly redirected the conversation to focus on breakfast. His mother immediately embraced him, exclaiming how adorable he was and expressing her desire to hug him once again. Sarah joined in the hug, requesting one as well. In his mind, Jamie silently pleaded for someone to intervene. They all sat down at the table, and Sears hugged her daughter, calling her sweetie. Jamie looked at Sarah and felt the urge to squeeze her cheeks, as children's cheeks are always soft. He buried his head on the table, chastising himself for his thoughts. He had grown accustomed to this peaceful life. After finishing breakfast, Sears mentioned that everything would begin tomorrow. Her husband agreed, and Jamie, lifting his sister in his arms, asked what would happen tomorrow. Sears turned to her husband, indicating that she hadn't told them yet. She turned away and explained that she had forgotten. In the midst of worrying about her son, Jamie realized she was referring to the technique he had used before, understanding that she must have been greatly concerned. He lowered his gaze and apologized sincerely. His mother reassured him, saying she understood that nothing would happen to him. However, she cautioned that if he continued to exhaust himself, she might faint somewhere in the corridor due to her overwhelming sadness. Jamie promised that he wouldn't repeat his actions. Curiosity piqued, he asked again what would happen tomorrow. His mother chuckled and revealed that they would all be attending a grand ball together. Jamie realized it was the huge ball organized by Earl Simon and Earl Welton, where nearly all the nobility residing in the northern part of the Seldom Empire would be present. His mother expressed her excitement, noting that neither of them had ever attended a ball before and that it was the perfect time to do so, especially given their age. She was genuinely happy about it. Jamie sensed that his precious free time was coming to an end. As night fell, he once again donned his cloak and called for Blackie. Blackie clung to him as Jamie declared that they needed to visit the two individuals he referred to as blockheads. Upon arriving at Ryza's house, Azard and Ryza, who were seated at the table, immediately stood up to acknowledge Jamie's presence. Jamie removed his hood and inquired if they had accomplished the task he had assigned them. Ryza apologized and admitted that they hadn't obtained any information about the Zenith cult. Jamie speculated that even members of Revel would struggle to gather information in just one day. He then asked about another task, prompting Ryza to point towards the bound Pip and explain that they had made progress in that regard. Pip hummed and regarded Jamie with curiosity, wondering about the significance of their unusual hair color and whether they had been influenced by the Welton family. Ryza informed Jamie that Pip was one of the members of Revel and that he also knew that Hanai was supposed to kill them. This revelation indicated that Pip was not an ordinary pawn. Azard chimed in, expressing his ignorance as well. Jamie decided to interrogate Pip and instructed Ryza and Azard to remove the gag from his mouth. As soon as the rag was removed, Pip began pleading with Jamie, insisting that he genuinely didn't know anything. He offered to provide information if they spared his life. Jamie dismissed Pip's fear, referring to him as a child, which made Pip wonder why he felt goosebumps. Jamie assured Pip that he had no intention of killing him but wanted him to carry out specific tasks. Pip trembled in fear, feeling the overwhelming and terrifying power emanating from Jamie. He cried out and promised to do whatever Jamie asked, as long as he spared his life. Jamie noted Pip's loud outburst, causing Pip to fall silent and wonder why he suddenly couldn't speak. Jamie revealed that Pip only had to fulfill one task. He touched Pip's head and cast a spell, instructing him to go to the Count's estate and divulge everything about their organization's activities. Without uttering another word, Pip rose to his feet and left the house, making his way towards the estate. Jamie's subordinates watched over Pip as he departed, and Jamie reassured them that Revel was unlikely to capture him. However, he warned that his father would be the first to deal with him, emphasizing the need for them to leave the city and find a hiding place. The subordinates acknowledged Jamie's orders, and Blackie perched on his shoulder. Jamie inquired if they had any questions, to which they replied by bowing and affirming that their loyalty to the master's commands was unwavering. Ryza added that he understood the reason behind Jamie's instructions. Jamie agreed, acknowledging that Ryza seemed to grasp the gravity of their situation. He stated that it was likely his father would obliterate Revel, and he saw no value in his father learning about the existence of Ryza and Azard. Jamie turned away and informed them that he would be absent for a few days, advising them to remain quiet until his return. They obediently followed his order, and Jamie left the house. Ryza chased after him, calling out his name. Jamie turned around and asked what was the matter. Ryza expressed his concerns about what they had become, implying that he knew they were already dead and that there was no way to change that fact. Ryza didn't want to regress into his past life and was grateful for the strength he had gained. However, he still desired to understand the nature of the creature he had become. Jamie inquired about the specific information Ryza sought, to which Ryza responded that they were much more powerful than before. He wondered if this meant they had become top-ranked undead. Amy was taken aback by Ryza's question and couldn't help but laugh. Ryza immediately felt embarrassed and apologized if it was a foolish question. Jamie reassured him with a smile, saying that it wasn't stupid at all. He found it amusing because most people usually ask whether they truly became undead or not. He had never encountered someone who took it as lightly as Ryza did. He found them to be intriguing individuals. Ryza thanked him, and Jamie thought to himself that he had never met anyone quite like Ryza. Most people refused to accept that they had turned into monsters and lost their humanity. But Ryza and Azard were the complete opposite of those people. Azard also left the house, and Jamie thought that he had found good servants in Ryza and Azard. He explained that they were just ordinary zombies whose appearances he had preserved from before they died. As zombies, their strength had increased, making them much stronger than ordinary people. Ryza became frustrated and lowered his eyes, acknowledging that they were merely ordinary zombies. Jamie laughed and told him that everything depended on them. Perhaps one day they would become zombies of the highest level. The guys were inspired by Jamie's words, and he informed them that he had to leave and that they needed to find a hiding place. They joyfully replied that they would wait for his return. Little Blackie squealed, and Jamie jokingly told him not to call them pathetic, as he found them quite interesting. They reminded him of someone from his past. Jamie concluded that they had been in the city long enough and needed to go back. That night, the Welton house was restless. One of the members of Revel, a large criminal organization in Hayes, decided to betray the group. Since the Count had to stay late for business, only 3 members of the Welton family went to Regen, the largest city in the east. Jamie was riding in a carriage and contemplated that he could have used his teleportation skill to get there himself. He observed his mother and sleeping sister and realized that he was much stronger now than before, thanks to magic's incredible progress. However, he was uncertain about how much time had passed since his death, as the events after his demise were recorded in history books. He learned about an army of demons led by a demon lord attacking humans, but there had been no wars for the past few hundred years. Dark magic emanated from him, and he felt that the gods couldn't unite against him, which suited his plans. He acknowledged that many people would die, but it was no longer his concern. Sarah sensed the dark magic and winced, causing Jamie to regain control of himself. He thought about finishing the ball first. The carriage entered the city, adorned with beautiful decorations and a stunning temple nearby. Jamie admired the scenery and remarked on its beauty. His mother explained that Regen was the most advanced city in their kingdom, with a massive amount of money flowing through it. Jamie couldn't help but be amazed, considering Selim to be one of the richest cities in the kingdom, thanks in large part to Regen. The carriage came to a stop, and the coachman announced that they had arrived. Jamie expressed his overwhelming desire to see Count Simon, feeling as though his heart would leap out of his chest. His mother hugged him affectionately, commenting on how adorable he was and urging him not to worry. Jamie questioned why he needed all this attention, and his mother playfully asked if he was implying that his heart was about to jump out. She suggested that he could hold her hand if he wanted. Finally, his mother let him go and inquired if he admired Uncle Simon so much because he also aspired to become a magician. Jamie wearily confirmed this, feeling squeezed from both sides. His mother explained that Count Simon was an incredible individual, just like his father. Being a 7th grade mage, he held a prominent position as one of the 2 leaders of the kingdom's Eastern Council of Nobles and served as Lord of Regen. His magical abilities were comparable to the Red Lotus, earning him the title of the Red Lotus Magician. Rumor had it that he could annihilate 1,000 people with a single spell. Curious about the person behind the title, Jamie asked his mother to describe Earl Simon. After a brief pause, she mentioned that his hair was as red as blood. Jamie found this slightly surprising but concluded that the color of his hair or his magical grade didn't matter to him. Instead, he wondered about his strength, which allowed him to take so many lives. He felt a desire to talk to him. As they entered the estate, Jamie reflected on the somewhat futile conversation he had with Marquis Lyol. It had been brief, leaving him pondering what his dialogue with Count Simon would be like. Sarah got out of the carriage and advised the children to follow her carefully. Jamie quickly disembarked, and a man approached them, addressing Jamie's mother as the wife of Earl Welton. She confirmed his statement, and the man offered to escort them to their chambers. He led them into opulent chambers, explaining that they would be their accommodations for the entire event. If they had any requests, they could inform their personal butler. Sarah remarked to Jamie about Count Simon's thoughtfulness, to which he agreed. The man then informed Jamie that he could use the room, leaving him impressed by the considerate gesture. He couldn't fathom sharing a room with his parents and appreciated the privacy. Sarah instructed her children to return to the chambers after they had settled their belongings. A few minutes later, a maid began braiding Sarah's hair, remarking on its smoothness and beauty. Jamie entered the room and couldn't help but express his surprise at his mother's beauty. Sarah laughed and asked if he thought she was pretty too. Jamie confirmed her statement, bringing joy to her heart. She rushed towards him, exclaiming how handsome he looked that day. The maid cautioned her to maintain composure to avoid ruining her appearance. Sarah turned around, her eyes welling up with tears, and asked if she could hug him just once. The maid regretfully informed her that it wouldn't be possible as it would wrinkle her dress. Jamie let out a sigh of relief, and another maid announced that the young lady, Sarah, was ready. Sarah emerged in an adorable dress, prompting her mother to scream with delight, expressing how cute she looked. Jamie observed Sarah and remarked that she looked like a doll. Sarah felt delighted and asked if she was cute. Jamie replied that she was indeed very nice but seemed uncomfortable. He suggested they be patient until the end of the holiday. Sarah agreed, and a maid suggested that the young master should also change his clothes. They all proceeded together to the banquet hall, where the festivities were just beginning. Jamie glanced around and wondered if ballrooms had always been this luxurious. They took their seats at the table, and he asked if Count Simon truly enjoyed such extravagance. His mother confirmed and mentioned that he would be particularly surprised when they met him in person. The other ladies noticed Sarah's mother, Sears, and identified her as Madame Welton. They hadn't seen each other in a long time, but they remarked on her enduring beauty. One of the ladies pointed out the exquisite dress Sears was wearing, made from organic cotton grown on their lands. She explained that Sears had personally designed the dress so that she could wear it even in winter. Sears expressed her gratitude for their compliments, while Jamie felt disgusted by their attempts to flatter his family. He had encountered many people like them in the past, who would grovel before those in power. It repulsed him, but he was glad that his mother knew how to handle such individuals. A man stepped forward into the center of the hall and greeted everyone who had come to Count Simon's ball. He introduced himself as Rael Banner, a member of the city's administrative bodies. After a few more words, he concluded his speech, announcing that the ball would begin soon. He urged everyone to take their seats and be ready to welcome Earl Simon and his family, who would arrive shortly. He pointed in the direction of the Count, and footsteps could be heard. The red-haired Count appeared before their eyes, causing Jamie to become very nervous upon seeing him. Count Simon acknowledged the guests, expressing his hope that everyone would enjoy the event. He continued walking, and Jamie thought that he was almost on the same level as Marquis Lyol, or perhaps even stronger. The Count approached their table, exceeding Jamie's expectations of the Red Lotus magician. Jamie found it intriguing. The Count approached Sears from behind, accompanied by his wife, and mentioned that they hadn't seen each other in a long time. Sears commented that she looked much better than she did last year and expressed her happiness that he was also in good health. The Count inquired if Count Welton, Sears' husband, would be present, and she replied that he would join them later as he had some issues to attend to. The Count understood the situation. He then looked at Jamie and asked if he was their son. Sears confirmed and introduced him as Jamie Welton, along with their daughter, Sarah Welton. Sears instructed her children to greet Count Simon, and they promptly did so. The Count's wife remarked on how beautiful they were, and Sears thanked her, adding that they were also very intelligent. The Count's wife laughed and acknowledged Sears' remark. Count Simon focused his gaze on Jamie, scanning his entire body. Jamie smiled and thought to himself, "Let him look. I'll show him my strength." The corners of the Count's lips rose upward, indicating a hint of intrigue, asked if his name was Jamie. He confirmed his words with a smile, and the Count said that they would talk to him later. Jamie agreed, and after that, the Count went to other guests. Jamie thought that, as expected from Earl Simon, he had exceeded all his expectations. He couldn't wait for their second meeting. Everyone gathered to welcome the Count and his wife. The Count's wife told the Welton family to make themselves comfortable. One of the Earl's sons frowned and glanced at Jamie, who was asking when his father would arrive. His mother replied that she believed it was closer to midnight. The Earl's family took their seats at their table, and one of the boys asked his father for his opinion on the Earl of Welton's son. The Count questioned why a 10-year-old child interested him so much. His son responded that although they were young now, in the future, the Welton son would become the head of their family. Since they were almost the same age, he suggested they get to know each other. The Count remained silent and thought about rumors he had heard regarding the Welton son's leadership qualities among noble children. While he considered it foolish, he decided to play along a little. He told his son that he was wise beyond his years, which made his son somewhat pleased. The son asked if there was anything else the Count could share about him, but the Count remained silent and suggested they focus on enjoying the party. The son agreed, and they began to eat. The Count's wife touched her son's hand and advised him to get along with the Welton son, as their families had been allies for a long time. The son responded silently, assuring her not to worry. She smiled, satisfied with his response. The son looked at his joyful mother and silently asked for her forgiveness. He glanced at Jamie and contemplated how he had never considered getting along with him. He imagined, believing that Jamie would eventually submit to him. Suddenly, his father's hand resting on his shoulder, expressing that such behavior was expected from his son. He thought that this might help him gain his father's recognition. His brother, who had been observing him, grinned. Some time passed since the event began, and people started to leave their tables. Sears advised Jamie to make friends with everyone, but Jamie thought to himself that he didn't need friends and would spend his time alone wisely. He hoped to find a quiet place to retreat to. He went out to the backyard and discovered a luxurious garden with a gazebo and a greenhouse. He acknowledged that magic wasn't his only asset, realizing that someone of high status had achieved such a level. He wished to meet that person again soon. Suddenly, someone approached and asked who he was talking to. Jamie swiftly stopped and prepared to defend himself, pointing his weapon at the girl's neck. However, he reconsidered and put away his weapon. The girl breathed a sigh of relief and questioned how he could attack so suddenly. In response, Jamie asked if it was possible for someone to sneak up on him unexpectedly. The girl became angry and criticized his rude behavior towards a lady. Jamie retorted that she was fortunate to be alive and she fell silent. Curious about her identity, he asked who she was and how she managed to approach him undetected. The girl smiled and asked if he was interested in her and whether she should disclose her identity or not, considering his previous actions. Jamie found her demeanor unpleasant, and he wasn't in the mood to engage with her, stating that he wasn't interested in starting a conflict. In that very moment, Jamie unleashed his magical powers and cast a spell, shooting a magical projectile through the air, narrowly missing the girl. Startled, she looked at the depression in the ground while Jamie explained that it was an air bullet, a form of second-level magic. He emphasized that if her magical defense was not strong enough, the projectile would be fatal for someone as small as her. Confused by Jamie's actions, the girl wondered what was wrong with him and questioned if he was being serious. Jamie then asked if she still intended to introduce herself. Feeling fearful, the girl quickly confirmed her desire to do so and urged Jamie not to rush her. Responding to her plea, Jamie urged her to be quick before the bullet struck her. Shaken, the girl revealed that her name was Ash Ballet. Jamie inquired about her last name, wondering if she was from the Ballet family, the Viscounts of Ballet County. The girl confirmed his assumption, stating that she was indeed the eldest daughter of the Ballet household and a summoner of spirits. Curious about summoners, Jamie speculated that they were magicians who formed contracts with enigmatic nature spirits. He noted that summoners were considered exceptional magicians and could even claim the title of Baron. Jamie marveled at the fact that despite being the same age as him, Ash had already become a summoner, as most people would begin studying at the age of 10 to connect with nature. Ash expressed relief at having introduced herself and turned the question back to Jamie, asking who he was to wield such dangerous magic. Jamie, interpreting her inquiry as an attempt to interrogate him, hesitated. Given Ash's competitive personality, he believed she disliked losing to others. Responding cautiously, Jamie revealed that he was Jamie Welton, the heir to the Earl of Welton. He expressed pleasure at meeting her. Additionally, Jamie sensed something significant about the Ballet family, noting that they were loyal vassals to the Count. Meanwhile, the Earl of Welton was preoccupied with his own matters. He had captured the leader of Lewin and expressed annoyance at the gang's activities, although he had refrained from harming them thus far. The captured man coughed up blood, and Jamie questioned their involvement in human trafficking. The Count raised his foot and coldly declared that only a madman or someone tired of life would engage in such activities. The man pleaded for mercy, but the Count ignored his pleas and ordered the guards to hang him the next day. As the Count prepared to leave the region, a hooded figure observed from a tree, holding a magical sphere and declaring that the gang had failed. They mentioned preparing for Plan B. Meanwhile, Jamie continued to wander around the garden, with Ash persistently following him. At one point, Jamie abruptly turned around and questioned why she was following him. He pointed out that her father being a vassal of his father didn't automatically justify her actions. Ash cast her gaze downward and expressed her thoughts, but before she could finish, Jamie abruptly cut her off, instructing her to cease speaking in such an odd manner. He then warned her that he was returning and urged her not to trail behind him. In response, Ash grasped his hand, and Jamie, displaying annoyance, questioned if she was being genuine. He turned around and inquired as to why she was persistently bothering him. Ash explained that she had never met someone her own age before and wanted to be friends with him. Jamie was taken aback and wondered why she wanted to be friends. He remained silent, realizing that he had not anticipated this as the reason. He thought that having a servant as a friend would be acceptable, but he couldn't understand why she needed a friend in the first place. He walked away from her, stating that she should find someone else because he didn't need friends. Despite Ash's pleading for him to wait, Jamie continued to depart, prompting Ash to shout, her eyes filled with tears, that Jamie was so mean. Eventually, she left him behind, and Jamie thought to himself that he didn't need friends. He felt that she couldn't comprehend that friendship, like any relationship, wasn't based on rationality. He grew angry and thought negatively about her, as she had triggered an unpleasant memory. Suddenly, someone called out to him, interrupting his thoughts. Jamie turned around and saw the son of the Earl, accompanied by his friends. He noticed that the boy had red hair, identifying him as the son of Count Simon. The boy asked what Jamie called it, surprising his friends. One of the boys questioned the disrespectful tone towards their brother, while another wondered if Jamie even knew who he was. Knowledge that he was Alf, the eldest son and heir of the Earl Simon family. Jamie commented that they were being too noisy. With a smile, he raised his index finger and cast a silencing spell, instantly quieting the group. Alf became nervous and asked if Jamie had used a silencing spell on them. Jamie smiled and asked if Alf was aware of it, suggesting that Alf was slightly more perceptive than the others. Alf responded by calling Jamie a smug idiot and questioned whether he even realized that Jamie was older than him. Jamie dismissed the need for further discussion and urged them to get to the point. Jamie waved his hand dismissively, causing Alf to cough and then put on a smile. Alf explained that he wasn't there to fight, but rather wanted to have a conversation with Jamie. Alf praised Jamie, referring to him as an incredible brother who could use silent spells. Confused, Jamie asked whom Alf was referring to as his brother. Growing tired of the conversation, Jamie told Alf to go his own way. Alf asked if Jamie truly didn't know who he was, to which Jamie confirmed that he was aware that Alf was the son of Earl Simon. This revelation slightly calmed Alf, who expressed disappointment but believed that communication wouldn't be a problem since they would both become core members of the nobility in the eastern region in the future. Alf explained that the reason they had treated Jamie rudely was due to his own brusqueness. Jamie speculated that if he hadn't demonstrated his skills, they would have tried to befriend him by force. Alf reasoned that since they would potentially be influential figures in the future, it would be beneficial to establish friendship now. Jamie found Alf's words evasive and concluded that Alf intended to subdue him. Jamie sighed, considering himself foolish for listening to such pitiful talk, and declared that he had no interest in Alf or his ideas. He didn't want to listen and hoped that was all Alf wanted from him. Alf indignantly asked if Jamie was refusing him, which irritated him. Alf retrieved his magic staff and threatened to crush Jamie's feeble magic mercilessly, leaving Jamie with no choice but to serve him. Alf pointed his staff at Jamie with a smile, awaiting his response. Jamie chuckled and revealed that he had initially planned to resort to brute force. However, he had slightly altered his plan after witnessing Alf's magic. Jamie expressed disgust at Alf's duplicity at such a young age and questioned if he believed that adults would let him have his way. Alf assured Jamie not to worry, as no one would witness their interaction. Alf showed Jamie a pearl and then crushed it, causing the area around them to fill with magic. Jamie inquired if it was a magical artifact of illusion. Alf believed that Jamie truly was a magician if he recognized the artifact and confidently stated that Jamie would soon beg for his life. Alf dispelled the silence, and their friends immediately took in deep breaths, expressing relief. One of the boys remarked that he thought he would die because of Jamie's silencing spell, while another questioned if Jamie felt invincible just because he came from the Welton family. Jamie gazed at the magical dome and admired it as a nice artifact. One of the boys asked if he was deaf and warned him not to expect any mercy from them. Jamie looked at them and commented that he found it all quite interesting. Alf questioned if Jamie realized the gravity of the situation. Before Alf could finish speaking, Jamie cast a spell and instructed them to suffer. The boys began to experience pain, with blood flowing from their eyes and mouths. Jamie warned them not to disable the artifact, raised his index finger to his lips with a smile, and stated that otherwise, everyone would witness their torment in hell. The boys screamed in agony, and after a while, Jamie had already left them as they began to regain their senses. One of the boys asked his brother for help, while another exclaimed that his head felt like it was about to explode. Alf stood up, vomited, and coughed, realizing that he was on the brink of death. He vowed not to forget what had happened and pondered why everything had turned out this way despite being born into a family of knights. Alf questioned how Jamie possessed such magical power if he came from the Welton family, which specialized in swordsmanship. Tearfully, Alf rose to his feet and declared that he wouldn't forgive Jamie, determined to crush his talent and ensure he could never use magic again. The boys returned to the estate, and one of them questioned if Alf's decision was the right one regarding the artifact. Alf dismissed the concerns and instructed the boy to remain silent and follow him. Suddenly, Alf's younger brother, Lennon, called out to him. He looked around the corner and waved. Alf asked why Lennon was there, and Lennon expressed his dissatisfaction with Alf's choice of words, showing him the artifact and questioning how a younger brother could remain calm when his older brother had been offended. Alf was surprised and inquired where Lennon had obtained something so dangerous. Lennon smiled and replied, dismissing the importance of its origin, and urged Alf to go and teach the half-educated Welton a lesson. Lennon handed the artifact to Alf, who agreed, stating that destroying Jamie was much more important. At nightfall, Count Welton arrived and was greeted by Simon, who extended his hand with a smile. Count Welton was delighted and remarked that it was nice to be greeted in person. He shook Simon's hand and asked how he was doing. Simon replied that he was not bad and suggested they move to the reception area. Count Welton asked if the event was a success, and Simon responded that it was the same as always. Count Simon shifts the conversation by mentioning a brief encounter with Count Welton's son. Count Welton questions the authenticity of the meeting, chuckles and asks about the well-being of his little boy. Count Simon, also amused, comments on Count Welton's quick passion and expresses admiration for his deep love for his son. Count Welton responds, affirming that his children give his life purpose. Count Simon envies Count Welton's ability to love something so passionately. Count Welton is about to say something, but Count Simon's sudden silence interrupts him. Count Simon then praises Jamie, Count Welton's son, declaring him a child of remarkable talent and going so far as to describe him as a literal monster. Count Welton falls silent briefly, interpreting Count Simon's words as a diversion from the topic. Count Welton smiles broadly and asks if Jamie also appears gifted in Count Simon's eyes. Count Simon responds with a grin, stating that Jamie isn't just a little gifted but overwhelmingly talented. Count Simon believes Jamie is the most gifted person he has ever met, possibly even in the history of mankind. Count Welton mentions that Count Simon's praise echoes the sentiments expressed by Marquis Lyol. Curious, Count Simon asks if the Marquis has also seen Jamie, stating that he had been aware of Jamie's gift for quite some time, although he hadn't realized the extent of its uniqueness. As a result, he had approached the Marquis and asked for a favor, believing that Jamie should pursue the path of a mage due to his exceptional magical talent. Knowledge that this choice would be best for Jamie personally and would also benefit the world at large. Reflecting on Count Welton's actions, Count Simon remarked, "It was clever of you to have asked the great mage to be Jamie's teacher." Count Welton chuckled and replied, "But even the Marquis declined to take him as his pupil." Count Simon expressed his lack of surprise, mentioning that Jamie, being a genius with unparalleled talent, would develop his skills independently and eventually strive to become a legendary rank 9 mage. Count Simon admitted to feeling a bit envious that Jamie was born with more natural gifts than himself, but at the same time, he expressed his desire to witness the immense power that a mage of such extraordinary potential could attain. The revelation shocked Count Simon, and Count Welton continued, emphasizing the inherent weakness of humanity. Despite their claims of having built a magnificent civilization, Count Welton stated that from a broader perspective, human mages were too vulnerable when compared to dragons, high elves, or lands. Count Simon acknowledged that mankind could barely maintain the delicate balance only thanks to sword masters like Count Welton. Count Welton was left speechless, unable to respond to Count Simon's statements. Curiosity in his voice, Count Simon asked, "What if there were a rank 9 mage?" Count Welton remained silent but appeared visibly nervous, as evidenced by a gulp. Undeterred, Count Simon pressed on, saying, "Even dragons, the most powerful magical creatures, would not look down on us. I strongly wish for humans to be the master race of this world." Count Welton stated his belief that such thinking was arrogance. Count Simon countered, saying, "It is a necessary arrogance. You, Count Welton, know better than anyone else about the history that once existed and was soon forgotten. Count Welton fell into a contemplative silence, his mind consumed by the forgotten history. It was a history known only to a select few throughout the entire continent. Approximately 10,000 years ago, an event took place that wiped out all records preceding that point. The super races, with their advanced knowledge and abilities, chose not to share the secrets of what had transpired with humans. Earl Simon firmly believed that humans must gather enough power to stand against the super races in the event of a conflict. This was necessary to prevent the enigmatic beings from once again annihilating human civilization and erasing their history, just as they had done in the past. Both counts found themselves rendered speechless by the weight of these thoughts. Sensing the need to conclude their conversation, Count Simon suggested that Count Welton should rest. Count Welton replied, wishing him a good night's sleep and expressing the intention to meet again on the following day. Meanwhile, Jamie was sleeping in his bed, and his father approached him, contemplating whether the high expectations placed on his son would be justified. As a father with such a talented child, he worries for Jamie's well-being. He expresses his love and devotion, urging Jamie to grow up to be a fair and honorable person. Morning arrived, and everyone gathered in the banquet hall. Jamie sat in his chair, pondering what was troubling his father the previous night. Of course, he knew he wouldn't use mind control out of mere curiosity, and his abilities hadn't reached that level yet. Suddenly, Ash called out to him, and Jamie, feeling weary, expressed that they had already discussed everything the day before. He wanted nothing to do with her. Ash laughed and insisted that she did have something to discuss. She summoned her sister, leaving Jamie wondering what she was up to. She had decided to increase the number of annoyances. Irritated, Jamie stood up and declared that he was leaving, with no intention of getting involved with them. Ash exclaimed, questioning his departure, suggesting he should at least get to know her since their families were close. Her sister approached Ash and scolded her for being rude. She emphasized the importance of formalities and expressed disapproval of Ash's disrespectful tone towards the Count's son. Ash's sister, Rebecca, is the eldest daughter of the ballet family. Jamie immediately turned around upon hearing Rebecca's voice, and Ash remarked that Jamie himself had given her permission. While Jamie gazed at Rebecca, Ash playfully teased him, suggesting that he was smitten with her sister. She jokingly remarked that it was understandable since Rebecca was a beautiful lady. Jamie, however, spoke the name of the true love in his life, Jane. Jamie gazed at Rebecca and wondered how she ended up there, reminiscing about his beloved who had been sacrificed for her own good. This is where the story of Diablo Wolfir, devoid of emotions, begins. He couldn't have imagined that she would appear before him as a child. Al approached them from the side, identifying Jamie as Jamie Welton. Clenched the pearl in his hand tightly, Alf contemplated that Jamie would face consequences for what he did. In shock, Jamie looked at Rebecca and called her Jane. She asked who Jane was, while Ash inquired if Jamie had truly fallen in love. Al called out to Jamie, declaring that he would now obey him and activated a magical artifact, directing flames towards Jamie. Rebecca cried out to her sister in fear, but Jamie commanded Al not to disturb him. The flames immediately extinguished, leaving Al astounded. The Phoenix Ring, a rank 6 fire magic artifact created by Al's father, was not something a boy like Jamie should have been able to block. Alf's expression turned to one of astonishment as Jamie fixed him with a chilling stare, evidently filled with anger. In a fit of rage, Jamie cast a spell, causing a surge of magic to gather in his palm. Suddenly, ice began to envelop Al's body, causing him to scream in pain. Jamie continued, and Earl Welton swiftly covered his son's face with his hand, stating that it was enough. Jamie quietly called out to his father, who assured him that everything was fine. Jamie glanced at the ballet sisters, and his father confirmed that everyone was safe. Finally, Jamie closed his eyes and rested. In his father's arms, Count Simon approached them, and Count Welton, looking at his son with horror, thought that Jamie was actually going to do it. At first, he considered it a mistake, but it couldn't be categorized as such because if he had failed to stop him, Alf could have died. Count Simon stood in awe, unable to take any action but utter a single word, outstanding. As he observed the situation, Simon realized that although Alf's incompetence had diminished the spell's power to about half, the artifact's full potential had been unleashed, posing a threat to incinerate the entire ballroom into ashes. Yet, Jamie effortlessly nullified the danger in an instant, showcasing the potential of a mage who could rival the legendary rank 9 mages. A smirk formed on Simon's face as he acknowledged the splendid and marvelous display. He couldn't help but entertain the thought that Jamie might be the one to fulfill his lifelong dreams. Suddenly, Count Simon's wife called out to him, expressing her concern that Jamie had almost killed their son. Sears intervened and corrected her, stating that the only one who had attempted to kill was Alf, as he attacked Jamie first and used the artifact against him. Madame Simon began to cry and shouted that Alf only wanted a little something. Sears interrupted her and asked what "a little something" meant, urging her to continue. She started screaming, asking if she wasn't allowed to continue speaking. Her husband tried to calm her down, stating that it was enough, but Sears disregarded him and demanded that they explain what her beloved son had done. Madame Simon became frightened and silently pleaded for someone to help her. Count Simon stood in front of them, and she hoped that he would defend their child. However, Count Simon's response was not what she expected. He commented that it seemed like his son had behaved rudely on such an important day and sincerely apologized to Madame Welton. Sears pursed her lips, and whispers filled the hall. Surprisingly, she found his apology to be quite kind, and her anger dissipated. She thanked Count Simon for his apology and mentioned that perhaps she should leave. He agreed and suggested that Argano should also rest. Count Welton concurred, and whispers resumed in the hall. Count Simon apologized to all the guests for spoiling the evening and requested that they return to their chambers and rest well. The ball came to an end, and the guests started to leave. Madame Simon questioned her husband as to why he acted this way, stating that Alf was their son and that he suffered from the actions of this shameless monster. Count Simon glared at her menacingly and told her to be quiet, as there were many extra ears around. He instructed her to return to her place with Alf. Fearfully, his wife called out to him, and they all gathered in their chambers. She exclaimed, asking how he could do this when Alf was their son. Even if he was at fault, Count Simon should have taken his side. Count Simon ignored her and asked his son if he was trying to get his attention. His wife called out to him again, but Alf remained silent. Count Simon grew angrier and demanded that Alf speak up. Alf trembled in fear, and his father asked if he thought his actions would ruin their reputation in the eyes of the Eastern nobles and the entire kingdom. Alf burst into tears and thought about how scared he was, admitting that he just wanted his father to notice him. He looked up at his father and explained that Jamie had been rude to him, which was why he acted out. Count Simon didn't pay much attention to Alf's explanation and asked where he had obtained the Phoenix ring. Alf didn't answer, and his father expressed his dissatisfaction with having to repeat himself. He warned Alf that he would ask him one last time who had given him the ring. Tears streamed down Alf's face once again, and after a brief pause, he revealed that Lennon had given it to him. Following this revelation, Count Simon summoned his second son for a conversation. Lennon opened the door and questioned if he had been called. Upon seeing his brother, he clenched his teeth in displeasure, thinking about how pathetic he was for creating all the necessary conditions for success, yet still failing. He couldn't believe what an idiot his older brother was, and he knew he had to act dumb. Lennon immediately put on a smile and asked his father if he had summoned him. The Count inquired if Lennon was the one who had given his brother the Phoenix ring. Lennon confirmed his words and his father questioned why he would give something so dangerous to his brother. Lennon stepped aside and explained that Jamie had been bullying his older brother, and as a younger brother, he couldn't stand by and let him suffer. The Count didn't believe him and accused him of manipulating his brother. Lennon became scared, realizing he had been exposed, and wondered how his father had figured it out. Alf overheard this exchange and thought about Lennon. Their father declared that they probably already knew he wasn't interested in them, and he questioned whether they knew why. Despite sharing his blood, they lacked talent. However, that didn't mean he was unaware of their thoughts. If they were so eager for his attention, they should prove themselves worthy of his blood instead of resorting to tricks. He walked towards the door, stating that no matter what they were plotting, he wouldn't interfere anymore, but they needed to resolve the mess by asking Jamie Welton for forgiveness at dawn. He left the room, emphasizing that they would ask for forgiveness until he forgave them. The brothers were left alone, and Alf wondered if he would have to encounter Lennon again. Just the thought made him shake. He turned to his brother and asked if he was going to apologize, but Lennon remained silent. Alf pondered whether their father's words had made him feel worse and questioned why Lennon was silent. Lennon replayed their father's words in his head, and his eyes shone with admiration. He believed that his father would acknowledge him again and vowed to prove that he was worthy of his blood. Meanwhile, Sears approached her sleeping son and observed his face. She realized that the spell Jamie had cast to Alf was really intended to kill him. A wave of curiosity washed over her, wondering what circumstances a mere 9-year-old child like Jamie had endured to drive them to such actions. Initially, she had dismissed it as mere child's play, but now, considering the unleashed power within the artifact, she resolved not to forgive Alf, even in light of Earl Simon's apology. Clenching her fist, she vowed to seek proper recompense, even if it meant harnessing the might of her father's influential lineage. Suddenly, Jamie turned over in his sleep, and his mother's anxiety eased slightly. She rubbed her face with her hands and questioned her own thoughts. Her husband placed his hand on her shoulder and asked if she was all right. She responded softly, looking down at his hand, and asked why something should be wrong. He pulled her closer and asked what he could do for her, assuring her that he would do anything she wanted. She grinned and said that he had already done it. Her husband asked about Alf, mentioning that the guy seemed genuinely scared. Sears giggled and assured everyone that she was feeling fine at that moment. Argano asked if they could leave, as he couldn't rest while they stood there. They exited the room, and Jamie stirred under the covers. He removed the blanket from his head and contemplated the concerns expressed by Sears and Argano. He acknowledged that he couldn't control himself at that moment and sat down, closing his eyes. His thoughts drifted to Jane, considering the possibility that she had been reborn. Jamie found it plausible, given his own reincarnation after thousands of years. He mused on the fact that she didn't recognize him and lacked memories from her past life, which he deemed normal. Jamie considered whether their simultaneous rebirth was a twist of fate or someone's plan, perhaps involving the 12 gods. Suddenly, Chernish, his familiar, nuzzled against his cheek, interrupting his thoughts. Jamie dismissed Chernish's ramblings as nonsense, fearing that if others discovered his true nature, he wouldn't have a peaceful life. He stretched his familiar, Blackie, to the sides and pondered his own thoughts. Jamie's frustration grew as he recollected Jane lying in a pool of blood. Looking away, he resolved to meet her again as his first priority. In an unknown location, a robed man approached a dove and spoke of significant changes coming to the world of magic. He attached a letter to the bird's leg, mentioning Jamie Welton, the eldest son of the Welton family, who was believed to be an incredibly talented magician with at least a 4th-rank wizardry level. The man then released the carrier pigeon and watched it fly away. The next morning, Jamie ventured into a small forest, where white doves flew overhead. He paused, feeling the breeze, and asked his familiar, Little Blackie, if he also needed fresh air. Little Blackie squeaked in displeasure, and Jamie continued, understanding the response. He closed his eyes, remarking on how quiet and pleasant it was in the forest, likely because most people had already left. Jamie mentioned that before he returned, he needed to meet someone. While walking along the path, Jamie suddenly halted upon hearing a dripping sound. He looked around, trying to locate the source of the sound, and decided to use mana to concentrate and find it. He ran towards the source and caught his breath when he saw Rebecca sitting by the water, accompanied by a water elemental. Jamie thought to himself that the elemental might be Andine. Andine noticed Jamie's presence, and Rebecca turned to see who Andine was looking at. When she saw Jamie, she curtsied and asked if he was okay. Jamie confirmed that he was fine and awkwardly inquired about her name. Rebecca smiled and introduced herself as Rebecca Ballet. Jamie couldn't help but notice that both of them were water elemental summoners, which reminded him of Jane's last words about not forgetting her. Rebecca called out to Jamie. Noticing his sad expression, Rebecca inquired about Jamie's well-being, noticing the troubled expression on his face. In that moment, a rush of memories from his past life as Diablo Wolfir surged within Jamie. As Rebecca cast a glance towards him, she surmised that something significant must have transpired the previous day, leaving a lasting impact on Jamie. Taking a step closer, Rebecca reached out and embraced Jamie, providing him with comfort and reassurance that everything would be all right. Jamie, amidst the embrace, pondered that this sensation might be nothing more than a lingering echo from his past life. However, he allowed himself to savor it for a while longer, recognizing the potential for enjoyment it held. They then sat down together by the water, and Rebecca asked if he was feeling better. Jamie expressed his gratitude, and Rebecca responded with a smile. She shared that her father had taught her the value of sharing difficulties with someone, making them easier to overcome. Jamie asked if Viscount Ballet, Rebecca's father, had taught her that, and she confirmed his words, expressing regret that they couldn't have a proper conversation the previous day. She was glad for the opportunity they had that day. Jamie agreed, remarking that he had the same thought. Rebecca smiled and asked if it was true. Jamie confirmed her words and thought to himself that she seemed like a completely different person, maybe even for the better. Jamie mentioned that he had heard about their family tradition of making contracts with spirits of the air. Rebecca acknowledged this but explained that she had tried to enter into a contract with them without success. Despite her strong connection with the spirits, they appeared to her but immediately refused to make a contract and left. However, one day, Andine appeared to her and said that it was her destiny to form a contract with her. Rebecca admitted that it was an important decision she should have discussed with her father, but she accidentally signed the contract right away. Jamie reflected on how the Spirit King must have known about the contract with Jane's soul being reborn in Rebecca's body. Rebecca shared that her father wasn't angry but seemed a little upset about it. Jamie remarked that it was still something special, as an elemental appearing to someone and offering a contract independently was unheard of. Although Rebecca couldn't make a contract with the spirit of air, she was chosen by the water elemental. Jamie encouraged her to believe in herself. Rebecca was surprised by his words but then smiled widely and thanked him. Jamie stood up, thanked her for the day, and mentioned that he had to go. He quickly left, and Rebecca said that they would see each other again. She sighed, wishing they could chat more, and blushed as she pondered her feelings. In a sudden recollection, Jamie remembered something important, accompanied by a squeak from Blackie. He had forgotten to inform Rebecca to address him simply as Jamie, instead of using the formal, young master. Blackie let out another questioning squeak, implying curiosity about the situation. Realizing the challenge of approaching Rebecca in a more casual manner, Jamie contemplated the difficulty, possibly due to her mature demeanor. Blackie squeaked once more, seemingly teasing Jamie, to which Jamie responded, rhetorically asking who had asked for Blackie's opinion. Blackie appeared startled by Jamie's reply. After a while, Jamie returned to the estate, where Alf called out to him. Jamie turned around and saw the Simon brothers behind him. Alf awkwardly scratched the back of his head and asked for Jamie's forgiveness. Jamie was surprised and wondered why Alf was suddenly apologizing. He understood everything and asked with a smile if the Count had made him apologize. Alf looked shy and Jamie assured him that everything was clear. Jamie then turned his attention to Lennon, asking why he was there. Alf explained that Lennon was his brother. Jamie asked why Alf had brought him along, suggesting that Alf might have been too scared to apologize himself. Lennon replied that he was the one who gave his brother the artifact. Jamie's anger began to rise, and he questioned if the Simon brothers wanted to kill him together. Lennon replied with a smile, introducing himself as Lennon Simon. Jamie's eyes sparkled as he observed Lennon's aura and recognized his talent, realizing that Lennon surpassed Alf in comparison. It seemed that even having such a son wasn't enough for the Count. Lennon mentioned that nothing terrible had happened since he heard their apology, wondering if they could be free now. Jamie smiled irritably and thought to himself if Lennon took him for a fool. He hadn't shown up the previous day, making everything seem like trash to him except his father. If Jamie let him go now, it would surely come back to haunt him. He sighed and asked Alf if it would be difficult for him in the fight for the inheritance. Alf exclaimed, expressing confusion about what Jamie was talking about. Jamie looked at Lennon and asked if he was speaking the truth. Lennon grew scared, and Jamie reassured him that it didn't concern him. Jamie placed his hand on Lennon's shoulder and stated that if Lennon was responsible for everything, he should face the consequences. Jamie used his magic, and Lennon asked what he was doing. Suddenly, Lennon fell silent, realizing that there was nothing around him. He felt a chilling coldness and began to rub his palms, fearing he was about to freeze. Falling to his knees, he heard a voice saying that this was his last chance. The darkness lifted, and Lennon realized it was all an illusion. He clutched his head, sobbing in fear, while Alf called out to him in concern. Lennon started crying and believed that he knew one thing for sure. He looked at Jamie, thinking that this was his last opportunity and that he should beg for forgiveness. Trembling with fear, Lennon came to a realization that it was crucial for him to humble himself in that moment and offer a sincere apology. Though struggling to find his voice, he managed to utter a single word, imploring for forgiveness. The day of departure arrived, and the carriages were ready at the estate. Jamie stepped out onto the street, thinking that they were finally going home. He was exhausted from going out, and he longed to be embraced by his mother and stay at home. Shaking his head, he smiled and pondered his previous thoughts. Count Simon approached Jamie, remarking that he seemed to be in a good mood. Jamie turned around and replied with a smile that it wasn't that good, but he was simply glad to be returning home soon. The Count smiled and expressed regret that he never had the chance to communicate with Jamie. Jamie returned the smile, saying that he hoped so too and shared his feelings. The Count suggested that Jamie could stay if he wished. Jamie disagreed, emphasizing his strong desire to go home quickly due to his exhaustion. The Count was momentarily taken aback but then smiled and laughed, stating that everything Jamie said was true. The magical world had begun to observe him. Jamie responded with something expected, and the Count laughed again, mentioning that he apparently knew who Jamie was. They went for a walk, and Jamie asked if he wasn't mistaken and if the Count's son's name was Lennon. Jamie implied that he had taught Lennon a lesson. The Count replied that he thought so, as Lennon had not been himself since yesterday. Jamie looked at the Count with concern and asked if he was angry about it. The Count responded that these were the consequences of their decisions and questioned why he should be angry. Jamie realized that he now understood what was wrong with the Simon brothers. He remarked that Lennon appeared to possess considerable talent, suggesting that he should be trained. However, the Count disagreed, asserting that he knew more about Lennon's abilities than anyone else. He dismissed Jamie's suggestion, stating that it held no value. Jamie smiled nervously and expressed that if he didn't make an attempt, he would never know if Lennon could reach his level. He argued that Lennon wouldn't be able to showcase his talent under such pressure. Pointing his finger at Count Simon, Jamie blamed him for the situation, claiming that it was all his fault. The Count was surprised by Jamie's words, and Jamie continued to explain that the Simon brothers had become the way they were because the Count failed to recognize their talents. Perplexed, the Count asked what Jamie was referring to. Jamie clarified that while Alf was ordinary, Lennon possessed great potential. Simon expressed his thoughts, remarking how Jamie had casually mentioned that he didn't recognize Lennon's talent. In response, Jamie simply smiled, which left Simon pondering how a young child like Jamie could possess such unwavering confidence in his son's potential. Simon found it intriguing, as conversing with Jamie felt akin to speaking with a mage of extraordinary power, someone truly incomparable. Jamie suggested that by helping his son, the Count might surpass himself. The Count was surprised once again and was about to ask something, but Sears called out to her son, announcing that they were ready to depart. Jamie turned around, waved his hand dismissively at the Count, and advised him not to give importance to the words of a foolish child. He quickly entered the carriage, leaving the Count behind. As Jamie ran into the carriage, the Count's eyes sparkled. He closed his eyes and muttered that things were going as expected. It had been a while since the ball at Count Simon's estate. Jamie stood in a clearing in the forest, leaning against a stone, waiting for someone. Blackie looked around, and suddenly, Jamie noticed something to the side and alerted Riza and Azard to hurry. Riza and Azard emerged from the bushes, and Jamie asked them displeased where they had been. Riza explained that Azard had been idle, causing them to be late. Azard apologized, but Jamie told them to forget about it and urged them to share what they had learned. Riza revealed that the Zenith Church had been engaging in charitable work in Hayes, providing food and shelter to those in need. They had created a positive impression by serving the poor and preaching the will of God. Initially, the civilians didn't pay much attention, but as the church's activities continued, people began to rely on them and eventually became believers. The Zenith Church's position in Hayes had risen significantly. Jamie asked when they had started these actions, growing concerned, and stated that the fool Zenith would never engage in charity work. He called his subordinates and inquired if they believed that war and peace could coexist. After a brief exchange, they agreed that it was not possible. A sudden thought occurred to Riza, and he suggested that perhaps they were connected. Jamie agreed, explaining that this was the essence of Zenith. He believed that the world was like a hill covered in corpses, with war being the manifestation of Zenith's divinity. Consequently, he suspected that there was something hidden beneath the church's nobility, and they needed to uncover it. Riza and Azard assured Jamie that they would accomplish the task. Jamie thought that he would definitely uncover Zenith's plans. As time passed and morning arrived, Ricky found himself in the shelter of the Zenith Church. The priest praised Ricky, stating that compared to begging and constant beatings, this was paradise. Ricky reflected on the past month and a half spent in the shelter and felt grateful for the refuge it provided for him and his sister. Ricky's sister, who was blind, asked if it was Ricky who had returned to the room. Ricky confirmed it and thought about the hardships they had faced, including their parents abandoning them. They had endured a difficult life on the streets, with no help from others. However, the Zenith Church had extended a helping hand to them, giving them a second chance. Ricky aspired to become a priest and spread the miracles he had experienced. As they went outside with others, a guy approached them and asked if they had heard about Shino. Ricky inquired what they were supposed to hear, and the guy explained that Shino had received a divine blessing and would become a priest the following week. Ricky was surprised by the news and wondered if he, too, would become a priest. Time passed, and Jamie flew over the city at night, informing Blackie that they were almost at their destination. Descending, he noticed a blonde young man lying on the road. Jamie landed nearby and questioned the young man's condition, wondering if he was a priest due to the divine power emanating from him. Observing the blade on the young man's belt, Jamie found it troublesome and contemplated ending his life. However, the young man grabbed Jamie's leg, startling him. The exhausted young man tried to say something, but Jamie couldn't understand him properly. The young man mentioned that he was hungry before losing consciousness. Jamie hesitated, thinking it might be better to leave him there to starve, but ultimately decided to leave and instructed Blackie to follow. The next morning, Jamie joined breakfast and was surprised to see the fair-haired young man present. The young man took a bite of his bun and recognized Jamie as he introduced himself. Jamie wondered why this unpleasant individual was eating at the same table. The young man chuckled and expressed gratitude for Count's help, mentioning that he would have died of hunger on the streets if not for the guards who brought him to the shelter. Count dismissed any merit on his part, attributing the young man's rescue to the guards. The young man acknowledged that it was an unusual case for a Knight of Light to die of hunger, but emphasized that they were still human and could endure longer due to their high rank. Jamie started feeding strawberries to his sister and felt uneasy about their situation. He wondered why his parents were treating him so well. The Count asked if he served the Church of Pero, to which the young man replied that he served Pero, the goddess of mercy and punishment. The Count turned to his wife and asked if she was surprised when she heard about it. She confirmed her surprise, and the young man questioned why there was something wrong with it. She asked if he had heard of Bishop Sephir, and he inquired if she was from Aton. She replied affirmatively, stating that she was from the Bell family. This revelation surprised the young man, who then rose from his chair and knelt before her, greeting her respectfully. Jamie was taken aback and wondered what was happening. He knew that the Pero Church was located in Aton, where the Bell family resided, but he didn't think that alone warranted such a display of respect. He called out to his parents, and his father asked what the matter was. Jamie, with a smile, questioned why the man had greeted his mother in such a manner, feeling like he was being forced to act like a 9-year-old. The Count laughed it off and said it was a long story that he might tell another time. Jamie became upset and sarcastically remarked that it was great. He thought that even after such humiliation, the man hadn't told him anything. His sister waved at him and called him cute, but Jamie didn't believe it had worked. He thought that if the Bell family's close ties with the Pero Church were true, it could become a problem because he would eventually have to kill her. Time passed, and the Count and the young man entered the living room. Asked how the young man ended up there, considering that the Pero Church had no business in the eastern region. He questioned if the young man was there to expand his influence. The young man nervously waved his hands and replied that he was and somehow ended up there. The Count asked if he was following someone, and the young man sighed and admitted that he was pursuing someone who was conducting unthinkable and cruel experiments that should not be done. He was chasing the creator of the chimeras. Argano exclaimed, asking if the young man was claiming that the creator of the chimeras was in haze and questioned who he was. The young man pursed his lips and remained silent, asking for forgiveness and explaining that the rest of the information was so secret that not everyone within the church knew about it. He couldn't discuss it with anyone, but he promised to share it with Jamie if he listened to his request, and they made a contract. The Count asked if he was asking for help, and the young man confirmed, stating that if Jamie, as a swordmaster, helped him, it would greatly aid their cause. Argano contemplated the creator of chimeras and mentioned that they were treated worse than ordinary criminals because chimeras were based on humans. While there might be those who didn't use humans to create them, there were no known precedents in history. He stated that he couldn't promise full support, but, knowing about the family's relationship with the Pero Church, he couldn't turn a blind eye to it. The young man expressed his joy and asked if this meant the Count would help him. With a smile, the Count confirmed his assistance, prompting the young man to happily jump up from the sofa and thank him. Argano advised him to stop being overly nice and inquired about why the church was persecuting the creators of chimeras. He also questioned why they didn't seek help from the kingdom. The young man averted his gaze and explained that while the kingdom would likely offer assistance, it would greatly undermine the authority of the church in this particular case. He revealed that the creator of the chimeras, who was being pursued by the church, had kidnapped over 10 goddess knights. This revelation made the Count nervous. As he realized the severity of the situation, the young man further disclosed that the creator had developed chimeras capable of using divine powers. Meanwhile, Jamie strolled through the garden and found himself eagerly anticipating tea time. As he approached the gazebo, his mother asked if the person he was waiting for had arrived, and she quickly seated him at the table. After pouring him tea, she inquired about what he was so curious to know. Jamie replied that he wanted to understand why the young man had shown such solemn respect to his mother, someone he had never seen before. Smiling, his mother acknowledged his curiosity and revealed that her own grandfather, who Jamie had never met, was the savior of the Pero Church. This ancestor had aided the church when a crucial item was stolen, preventing the followers of the Demon King from summoning their lord. Jamie was surprised to learn about his mother's family connection to the church and wondered if her grandfather's actions were the reason why their family was granted the title of archbishop by the Pero Church. His mother explained that it was a reward for their ancestors' sacrifice, and for the next 100 years, the family's head would hold the rank of bishop. Jamie now understood the reason behind his mother's sadness and contemplated their family's position within the church. He couldn't help but think of how he would eventually use this connection to his advantage in seeking revenge against the creator of the chimeras. However, for now, he decided to make the most of the situation and enjoy the tea with his mother. Later that night, someone announced that their younger brother, Shino, who had been chosen by their father Zenith, would be leaving home. They all offered their blessings for his upcoming journey and raised a glass in celebration. Ricky happily thought about Shino finally going to Mount Channon. Sometime later, Shino sat in the carriage and called out to Ricky and Anna, expressing his gratitude for seeing him off. Ricky mentioned that the priest had informed him that he would also be sent away soon, so they might not have to endure the loneliness of being apart for too long. Shino smiles and assures everyone that he won't cry, stating that he will go to his destination first and wait for them to join him soon. As the coachman signals the horses, they start riding away from their current location. Ricky loudly advises Shino to take care of himself, smiles and contemplates his future as a priest. After some time, the carriage comes to a stop near a building, and the priest informs Shino that they have arrived. Shino is surprised and asks if they are already at the correct place. Looking out the window, he wonders if this is Mount Chongan, expressing concern that the cart couldn't have traveled such a long distance. He questions the priest if they have reached the main branch of the Pero Church. The priest reassures him that everything is fine and instructs him to follow. The priest then retrieves a book and activates a mechanism that opens a hidden passage. He tells Shino that they must now go down, but Shino hesitates, expressing his belief that they are in the wrong place. Shino follows the priest, calling out to him, and expresses his apprehension about the strange place they are in. Suddenly, a mutilated human hand emerges from an open door, causing Shino to become frightened and seek refuge with the priest. Shino describes the place as strange and unsettling. The priest removes his hood, revealing himself as the bishop, and smiles as he observes Shino. Shino is surprised and asks if the bishop just called himself a bishop. He kneels down and questions why he is in such a terrible place instead of Mount Chongan, wondering if it's because he was chosen by God. The bishop affirms that Shino is indeed the chosen one and explains that they are in this place because it represents their utopia. The bishop expresses his desire to witness the transformation of such a pure and innocent child and insists that Shino must be there. At that moment, a man with abnormal growths on his body approaches them, stating that they are now worthy experimental subjects and that Shino will become a beautiful chimera. Shino is overcome with fear as the man reaches out his hand towards him. Sometime later, in the lands of the Earl of Welton, on Hay Felbar Street, Jamie remarks that they are on Fela Street, the largest street in Hayes. He recalls the difficult night when he was starving in this very place. Argano suggests that the reason Jamie is showing him the city is because their child is very intelligent. The knight remarks that it would be impressive if their child could become a part of the city's administration or even higher positions. Reflecting on his current state, Jamie walks with an angry expression, feeling unlucky and as if someone has cursed him. The knight finds it intriguing that a 9-year-old boy possesses such stamina and a developed memory, suggesting that he could hold a position of authority. The knight calls Jamie's name, expressing gratitude and stating that thanks to him, he was able to explore the city of Haze. Jamie replies that he hasn't left the house in a while, so he also enjoyed the experience. The knight reaches out his hand to Jamie and suggests that they can return now that they are done with their task. Jamie declines the offer to hold his hand and instead asks if he can ask him something. This surprises and upsets the knight, who responds by saying that of course Jamie can ask his question. Jamie then asks what he and his dad talked about the previous day. The knight is taken aback by the sudden question and wonders why Jamie is asking about that. He had expected Jamie to ask something like if it's cool to be a holy knight. The knight admits that they talked about how handsome Jamie is and how handsome he will be when he grows up. However, Jamie looks angry and accuses the knight of deceiving him. Embarrassed, the knight wonders if boys his age don't like hearing compliments. He insists that he was not lying and that they genuinely talked about Jamie because his father loves him very much. Jamie expresses his disbelief and states that even children wouldn't believe such a story. The knight laughs, apologizes, and admits that he did deceive Jamie, but explains that it's something only adults can understand and he can't disclose the details to Jamie. Jamie turns around and thinks that something is definitely happening in Haze, which is why he asked the knight to show him the city. Concerned, the knight asks if Jamie is angry. Ignoring him, Jamie wonders what could be wrong. The knight becomes worried and asks what he should do as he realizes that Jamie was indeed offended. Then, Jamie remembers something and says that he forgot to show him one more place. Surprised, the knight asks about the place, and Jamie reveals that it's the Zenith church in Haze. Later, as they arrive at the church, the knight asks if Jamie is no longer angry. Jamie responds that they have reached the right place and reiterates that he is not mad. At that moment, Ricky, who is sweeping the floor at the entrance of the church, notices them. The knight looks around and comments that this is how it is. Ricky is surprised to see Jamie and recognizes him as the guy with black hair. The knight asks if Ricky is Jamie's friend, as it seems like he is looking at him. Jamie denies this and claims that it's his first time seeing Ricky. He adds that changing his hair color didn't seem to help him go unrecognized. Ricky questions why Jamie is acting as if they don't know each other. Meanwhile, a carriage approaches them at high speed. Ricky runs towards Jamie and asks if he dyed his hair because he could hardly recognize him. They both turn around and notice the carriage rapidly approaching. The coachman becomes frightened and tells Ricky to get out of the way. The knight and Jamie are taken aback by the situation and the horse's attempts to stop. The knight immediately starts running to save Ricky and shouts loudly. Ricky gets scared and starts crying, while looking at the horses in front of him, realizing that he won't be able to move in time. The knight is surprised when he notices something, and Ricky continues crying, asking if he's going to die. Jamie witnesses this and unleashes his energy, utilizing his chain field skill. He quickly creates a magic circle and releases chains made of magical energy. The chains manage to delay the horses, allowing the knight to save Ricky by moving out of the way. They turn around and see the chains stopping the carriage and horses. Ricky, filled with fear and shock, asks in disbelief if he is still alive. Overwhelmed with gratitude, Ricky embraces Jamie tightly and thanks him. However, Jamie becomes angry and insists that Ricky let go of him because he is strong and can't bear his weight any longer. Observing the scene, the knight realizes that Jamie's magic, used to save Ricky, is remarkably powerful for someone his age. Ricky refuses to release his grip, expressing his deep appreciation and considering Jamie his savior. Jamie tries to free himself from Ricky's embrace, complaining about his weight. The knight recognizes Jamie's exceptional talent and predicts that he will become even more formidable in the future. Jamie questions why he stood up as if he had been buried, prompting the knight to inquire where they are headed. Jamie wonders why the knight is asking such a question and reminds him that they need to go to Zenith Church. The knight agrees but questions whether he is overthinking things and underestimating Jamie. They follow Ricky, who exclaims his excitement about going to the Zenith Church and mentions that it serves as a shelter for children like him, who have nowhere else to go. Ricky notices an elderly woman and addresses her as sister. Intrigued, she asks where he has been and who these people are. The knight and Jamie catch her attention, and Ricky approaches her, recounting how a fast carriage was headed straight towards him, and they came to his rescue. Ricky introduces them as his saviors. The elderly woman expresses surprise and concern for Ricky, grateful that he escaped a terrible fate. The knight humbly states that it is their duty as servants of Puro. The elderly woman is taken aback to learn that the knight is affiliated with the Puro Church. The knight points to Jamie and admits that he contributed much more to the rescue. Jamie feels embarrassed and believes the knight's comment was unnecessary. The elderly woman is about to say something about Jamie, but the knight interjects, mentioning that Jamie is the son of the local ruler. Jamie provides his full name, and the elderly woman acknowledges that she should have recognized him immediately based on his emerald hair. Jamie wonders about her peculiar reaction, considering that she was born in the city of Hayes. He questions whether she is hiding something. The elderly woman asks if they have come to take Ricky back home. The knight explains that they came because they heard about the Zenith Church's presence in the area. The elderly woman departs, indicating that they should follow her, and suggests Ricky give the young master a tour. Ricky is surprised by this request and asks if he really needs to show them around. Jamie wonders if she is trying to separate them and worries that she may intend to harm Ricky. In response, Jamie mentions that he will forget about having dinner with his parents in the evening, implying that they will meet again later. The knight is taken aback by Jamie's statement but smiles and agrees that they will see each other later. Ricky, feeling shy, mentions that there is a dining room in the direction they are heading. As it is part of the orphanage where he lives, Jamie suggests dropping the formalities because he finds them ridiculous and doesn't care about such protocols. He assures Ricky that they can continue treating each other as before. Ricky is surprised by this and asks if Jamie is serious. He insists that Ricky should follow him as he will show him everything there is to see. Jamie wonders why Ricky is so happy, finding it difficult to understand. After some time, Ricky mentions that he has shown Jamie almost everything and reveals that he lives with his sister. Jamie dismisses the idea, claiming that he hasn't even thought about it. Ricky opens the door and introduces Jamie to Anna, referring to him as a friend. Jamie is taken aback, questioning who said they were friends. Anna begins to get up and asks Ricky if what he said is true. Jamie is surprised to see her and Ricky assists his sister, suggesting that she greet Jamie. Anna greets Jamie and reveals her name. Ricky looks at Jamie and asks if something is wrong. Jamie remains in shock, contemplating the situation and wondering if Anna possesses a holy essence. He is particularly surprised by her eyes, which seem to be filled with holy power. Jamie deduces that representatives of God on earth are servants endowed with divine power, and Anna appears to have such power. He ponders whether she could potentially cause problems in the future and considers the possibility of killing her to prevent that. However, he realizes that killing her now would be even more dangerous. Ricky is about to ask Jamie something and calls him, questioning with a smile if he has fallen in love with his sister. Jamie is taken aback by the question and asks what nonsense Ricky is talking about. Ricky explains that his sister is still young, but before he can finish, Anna hits him on the head and expresses her desire to ask Jamie something. She masks her anger and explains that there is something she finds incomprehensible in a book and asks for Jamie's help. Ricky assures her that he will assist Jamie. Anna accidentally hits Ricky with the corner of the book, and they all sit down together on the bed. Jamie observes them and wonders whose holy power Anna possesses, acknowledging the need to keep an eye on them. Ricky explains that he was heading towards a distant high tower where he believed no one could find him. Anna interjects, stating that she was aware of the tower and clarifies that it is not a cave but an actual tower. Jamie, about to leave, contemplates whether he should depart. Ricky notices Jamie's intention and asks if he is going to the restroom. Jamie denies this and confirms that he is indeed leaving. He gets out of bed and mentions that he will walk Jamie to the exit. He assures Anna that he will return soon and accompanies Jamie to the exit. Along the way, Ricky asks if Jamie will come to visit them again. Jamie remains silent, thinking to himself that Ricky never seemed to stop talking. He then asked Ricky what he aspired to be when he grew up. Ricky, curious about the question, expressed his gratitude for Jamie's interest in getting to know him better. Jamie appeared somewhat melancholic and stated that he was merely imagining things. With a smile, Ricky mentioned that initially, he didn't have any further aspirations after finding a place to stay with Anna. However, as time went on, he discovered that he did indeed have a dream. Ricky beamed as he shared his wish to receive the calling and become a priest of the Lord God Zenith. Ricky revealed that a friend from the orphanage had been chosen and had left for the headquarters the previous night. He expressed his envy, noting that he had never been more jealous in his life. Jamie was taken aback by this revelation, surprised to hear that someone had been chosen and sent to the headquarters. In a sudden realization, the ideas of the Order, human trafficking, the Rebel, and the calling started to connect in Jamie's mind, causing him to feel agitated. He immediately asked Ricky about his whereabouts before being accepted by the orphanage. Ricky hesitated and then replied that he had been on the streets. Jamie exclaimed, rejecting that answer. Ricky flinched but finally admitted that he had been doing chores and running errands for the Rebel. Ricky questioned why Jamie was so interested in hearing about that place. Jamie realized that this was it. He knew that the Zenith organization was involved in something nefarious and dirty.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button for more content. Feel free to leave a comment down below sharing your thoughts or suggestions. If you want to stay updated on all our latest uploads, click the notification bell icon. And hey, why not check out some of our other videos popping up on the screen right now? If you'd like to support the channel, you can do so by liking, sharing, and subscribing. It really means a lot. Peace.